If you grew up watching television in the 1970s, you surely remember this. The undersea world of Jacques Cousteau captivated American television viewers, introducing them to the natural wonders of the ocean and illustrating how little we actually knew about life under the sea. While Jacques Cousteau passed away in 1997, his family has carried on his legacy of ocean exploration, including his grandson, Fabien Cousteau, who recently completed a unique underwater mission. That mission included researchers from Northeastern University and our very own WGBH news science editor, Heather Goldstone, and she is with us. It's nice to see you.
It's good to be here.
Okay, before we do anything, I have to reveal to our viewers something. You told me, which I think is so awesome, and this was a dream come true for you, wasn't it?
Absolutely. I was one of those people who grew up watching Jacques Cousteau, was 12 years old when I decided I wanted to become a marine biologist because of Jacques Cousteau, and I wanted to live under the ocean. So I didn't actually get to live in Aquarius, this underwater habitat where Fabien Cousteau spent a month, but I did get to visit, and it was really pretty incredible.
I've heard a few of the stories, and it sounds like it was unbelievable. So tell us exactly what it is that he was doing.
So Mission 31 is what this latest mission was called. Fabien Cousteau was really marking the 50th anniversary of a mission by Jacques Cousteau back in 1964. It's his grandfather. He spent a month living under the ocean and then created an award-winning, Academy Award-winning documentary about it called World Without Sun. So now Fabien Cousteau has spent 31 days, the longest period, living in this underwater habitat called Aquarius. They're making a documentary about that as well. And then in addition, they had two different research teams, a team from Florida International University for the first 2 weeks, and then from Northeastern University for the second half, also down there with Fabien doing science.
And you.
Well, I got to visit for a few minutes. Yeah, it was pretty incredible. So the way you actually get into Aquarius, Aquarius itself is basically this hyperbaric chamber that they've sunk to the bottom of the ocean. And the way that you get into it, and we have some video, I think video that I took, where you actually you swim down, you scuba dive down to 60 feet of depth, and then you have to kind of duck under an overhang. And when you stand up, you actually stand up into air.
Incredible.
And then you walk up a few steps and you're on what they call the wet porch. And that's where they actually have their shower, they get changed out of their scuba gear, whatever, and then you make your way into this, the actual habitat, which is not big. It's about 43 feet from end to end, 9 feet wide.
Wow. And
inside that space, which is only about 400 square feet, I think, of living space, they've got bunks for 6, they've got a little bit of a kitchen and living area, they've got a little bit of lab working space, and then that wet porch. So.
And how long are those researchers and scientists down there?
Well, the average mission is about 10 days. So Fabien Cousteau was down there for 31, much longer. You can imagine cabin fever might be a little bit of an issue. But yeah, they're down there for several days at a time. And the way that they're able to do that, the entire habitat, Aquarius, is at the pressure at 60 feet. So they're actually at 3 atmospheres of pressure. And so as they're down there, nitrogen, it's the same thing that happens when you're scuba diving. Nitrogen can build up in your blood. If you go to the surface too quickly, that can turn into bubbles that cause the bends. But as long as they stay down there, it's okay. So they can stay down there, they can spend up to 10 hours a day out on the reef doing research, and then they have to spend 18 hours coming back up at the end of it.
Right, so it takes quite a while to come back up because you sort of slowly but surely get rid of that in your system, correct?
Very, very slow decompression to let all that nitrogen come out on its own, but very slowly.
And now, is there any effect when they're there, or are there long-term effects?
Well, there are some long-term effects that are more of a concern if you're either deeper or for longer periods of time. In this case, most of the aquanauts say they don't really worry about long-term effects, but while they're there are definitely effects. For one, all that nitrogen in their blood causes something called nitrogen narcosis. So they're all a bit euphoric, they're a bit giddy, judgment might be a little bit impaired. The surface teams that the aquanauts are working with tend to make the protocols that they're for whatever science they're doing very simple, really foolproof, so that nothing goes wrong. And then they're also burning an intense amount of energy. 400 to 500 calories per hour extra.
Per hour?
Per hour, not per day, per hour. Because the water, even though it's tropical water, is sucking the heat out of their bodies. And so just keeping up your body temperature alone is enough to really up that caloric intake.
Okay, so now while they're down there, tell me about the science that's going on, because obviously they're there for a reason.
Right, they're there for a reason. The Northeastern researchers that I was there with are particularly interested in the physiology of corals and of sponges, and I think we have some video of the team from Northeastern actually at work. They're taking these very detailed measurements inside. What we're looking at there is a giant barrel sponge, and then outside them just try to figure out at a very detailed level how they're coping or failing to cope with a lot of the stresses currently on Caribbean coral reefs. Pollution, nutrients, silt all running off of the land, overfishing, the impacts of recreational uses of the reefs, and now, of course, looking forward, the impacts of climate change, increasing temperatures, and changing ocean chemistry. So they're kind of trying to put that into perspective.
So Heather, what you're talking about, I think, is very, very important, but why do you have to live down there to do that? I mean, couldn't you just scuba dive down and get that information?
Well, and in fact, that research team we were just looking at, that was part of the surface team, and they were just on regular scuba. So they are doing that as well. But that team diving from the surface gets less than 2 hours per day that they can spend at 60 feet of depth because of the concerns about the bends, because of limitations on how much air they're carrying on their backs. In contrast, the aquanauts are spending up to 10 hours a day out on the reef. They can do much more intricate experiments, and then there's also something that a lot of the aquanauts refer to as the gift of time, that you can just slow down, you can look around you, and sometimes those observations are really important to the progress of the science, that when you're down there so focused on what you're doing because you've only got a half an hour on the bottom, you don't have time to just look around and observe things.
Sure. Do storms like the one that's coming up the coast, do they affect this kind of thing?
They can, definitely. I actually texted the crew earlier. They had, this morning was what they call splash up, so the aquanauts actually arriving back at the surface after decompression. And they said there was one pretty dramatic boat ride, a lot of lightning, a little bit of rain, but the mission's over, and so they're no longer being affected.
How about funding? How are they doing?
It's an interesting situation, and it's far from secure. The mission was cut out of the federal budget, essentially, or funding was dramatically cut in 2012 with all of the cuts in federal funding. And so what they've done is actually Florida International University stepped up to take it over, and they're looking for public-private partnerships for things like Mission 31, where Fabien Cousteau and his documentary team actually footed a lot of the bill for this mission to enable the researchers to come. So getting really creative with how to fund it. But Florida International University says they're committed to keeping it open, and that in fact they're looking to design and launch Aquarius 2.0, the next generation of habitat, sometime in the next decade.
I hope they can continue to fund it, because it's just so interesting to have that exist and people be living under the water.
It's really pretty fantastic.
Heather, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
And congratulations. I'm glad you got that chance.